Before you listen, if you enjoy the stories and want to hear more, then please consider subscribing. Most of you listening aren't subscribed, so please take this time to subscribe. Turn on notifications so you'll never miss a story and be the first to hear. You'll also be supporting me. Thank you. I was in need of a tropical getaway, so I decided to book a solo trip to Miami to soak up the sun on the beaches. After finding a reasonably priced hotel right on Ocean Drive, I packed my bags and got on a flight to Florida. When I arrived in Miami, I took a shuttle to my hotel and checked into my oceanfront room. I changed into my red and white polka dot bikini, slathered on some sunscreen, and headed out to the beach with a good book in my mesh beach tote. The sand was so soft and white, and the water was the most beautiful turquoise blue I had ever seen. I found the spot to lay out my floral beach towel and umbrella near the boardwalk. I rubbed tanning oil on my skin, wanting to return home with a nice golden glow. As I laid on my stomach reading my novel, I watched families building sandcastles, couples strolling hand in hand, and kids laughing and playing in the waves. The salty ocean breeze felt amazing. When I got hot, I'd take a refreshing dip in the water. The waves were pretty calm, with just enough force to gently rock me around. Tiny, colorful fish would swim right up to me and then dart away at the last second. I floated on my back for a while, just listening to the sound of the water and seagulls flying overhead. After a few hours of lounging on the beach, I was getting hungry. I packed up my things and stopped to rinse the sand off my feet at the shower station before walking back to my hotel. I took a quick shower to wash the sunscreen off myself and changed into a flowy orange Max dress. I did my hair and makeup before heading out to Ocean Drive to find a place for dinner. There were so many cute Art Deco hotels, restaurants, and bars lining the street. The atmosphere was so lively, with music playing, people laughing, and the smell of delicious food in the air. I settled on a trendy tapas restaurant with outdoor seating so I could do some people watching. I ordered a mojito and an assortment of small Spanish plates like patatas bravas, stuffed peppers, and garlic shrimp. Everything was so flavorful, and the ambient lighting strung above the street created a relaxed vibe. After dinner, I decided to stroll down Ocean Drive and check out some of the boutiques and souvenir shops that were still open in the evening. The crowds had died down a bit, but there were still quite a few tourists and locals mingling around. As I browsed through postcards and magnets picturing palm trees and beaches, an energetic young woman approached me. She said I looked like I knew how to have a good time and insisted I join her and her friends at a beach bonfire party a little ways down the beach. She seemed friendly and I didn't have any other plans, so I agreed it could be fun to make some new friends on my trip. We walked about half a mile down the beach until we came upon a group of around 30 people gathered around a large crackling fire, playing music and drinking. She introduced me to a few of her friends, who welcomed me and offered me a beverage. The fire was so warm against the cool night breeze, and the music had people up dancing and laughing. I ended up chatting with some interesting folks visiting from all over the world. We roasted marshmallows as we all shared stories about our travels and lives. After a couple hours, the party started quieting down. I realized I was getting tired and still had a ways to walk along the beach back to my hotel. The woman who had invited me to the party said she lived nearby and would walk back with me since it was dark out. We gathered our things and trekked through the sand together, the moonlight reflecting off the waves guiding our path. When we got closer to the more populated hotel area, she asked if I wanted to stop for a late night snack at a little bar she knew that served food. I was pretty full from dinner but didn't want to turn down her offer after she had been so friendly. We walked into a dimly lit bar with a neon sign buzzing in a window. There were a few patrons scattered at tables in the bar, but it was mostly empty. We sat at the worn wooden counter and ordered a basket of fries to share. Out of nowhere, a large, intoxicated man came stumbling over and plopped onto the stool next to me, slurring something incoherent. As he got closer, I could smell the liquor on his breath. I tried ignoring him, but he grew more agitated, reaching out and forcefully grabbing my shoulders, attempting to pull me off my seat. I shrieked in alarm, shoving him away with all my might. He lost his grip and toppled to the dirty floor. The bartender and other customers hurried over to check on the situation. The bartender roughly escorted the drunk man outside while asking if I was all right. Still in shock, I said I was okay, but ready to get back to my hotel. The bartender offered to call me a taxi for safety. I gladly accepted after the night's frightening turn of events. I finally arrived back at my room, still a bit shaken up. My first day in Miami had started out so relaxing and fun, but ended on an unnerving note. I was grateful it didn't escalate further and that I made it back in one piece. For the remainder of my trip, I played it safe, sticking to laying out on the beach and by the pool instead of the bar scene at night. Overall, despite the crazy night, I had a nice getaway full of sun, sand, and good food. I went home with a happy soul, dreaming of my next beach vacation. I was thrilled when my manager told me I'd be going to Paris for a week-long business trip. As a marketing manager for a major software company, it was a great chance to meet with our partners and customers in Europe. I'd get to give presentations on our new products, attend conferences, and network with leading tech companies abroad. Paris was one of my dream destinations, and I couldn't wait to finally experience the city I'd seen in so many movies and photographs. I imagined strolling beside the Seine, marveling at the Eiffel Tower sparkling at night, wandering the halls of the Louvre. The company booked me a room in a nice hotel right in the heart of the city for the trip. When I arrived at the hotel after my long flight, I was exhausted but eager to start my Parisian adventure. The front desk agent who checked me in was very friendly and charming in a way I associated with Parisian hospitality. "Welcome to Paris, madam," he said cheerfully as he came around the desk to help me with my suitcase and carry it to the elevator. Over the first couple days of my trip, I noticed the same front desk agent frequently appearing wherever I happened to be in the hotel. If I went down to the restaurant for the lavish breakfast buffet, he would come over to ask how I liked the pastries and recommend the chocolate croissants. When I was working on my laptop in the lobby, he would periodically come by my table to ask if I needed anything, more coffee, bottled water, or directions to anywhere in the city. At first, I thought he was just being helpful and hospitable, but after the third day, his behavior started to make me uncomfortable. I got the creeping sense that he was seeking me out instead of just happening to be in the same places. Whenever I glanced up from my work, I would catch him gazing at me from across the lobby. When I returned to the hotel in the evenings, he would seem to materialize at the front desk to greet me by name and ask about my day. One night after dinner at a lovely bistro, I entered the elevator to return to my room, only to find the front desk agent already inside. My uneasiness grew as he rode up with me at my floor, even though the lobby was on the ground level. I started scrutinizing the mirrors in the elevator to see if he was staring at me. The next evening, my misgivings were confirmed. As I approached my hotel room door, I heard soft footsteps behind me. I whirled around and saw the front desk agent ducking around a corner. My heart started racing as I quickly unlocked my door and hurried inside, making sure to deadbolt it securely. I woke up a few hours later to the jiggling of the door handle. Still disoriented from sleep, it took me a second to realize someone seemed to be trying to open my door from the outside. As the adrenaline kicked in, I let out a terrified scream. The jiggling immediately stopped. I scrambled to the bedside phone with shaky hands and called the front desk to report what happened. Within minutes, the hotel manager was knocking at my door to check on me. I described the front desk agent's stalking behavior over the past several days and the attempted break-in. The manager's face paled, and he assured me the man would be dealt with harshly. Shortly after, 2 French police officers arrived to take my statement. The officers informed me they had pulled security footage of the hallways, showing the front desk agent lingering suspiciously outside my door late at night and trying the handle multiple times. Thanks to the video evidence, he was arrested on the spot. The hotel manager came back to profusely apologize, assuring me the employee would be prosecuted and that my stay would be completely refunded. But the peace of mind I had felt when booking this trip was shattered. I spent the remainder of my time in Paris on edge. I wedged a chair under the door handle each night and jumped at small sounds. I felt exposed and vulnerable riding the elevator or walking the halls. The city I had been so excited to explore now felt threatening. As soon as my business meetings wrapped up, I took the first flight home, relieved to get out of there. In the months since, the ordeal still haunts me. I used to love traveling for work, but now the thought of staying alone in a hotel fills me with dread. I get panic attacks thinking about upcoming trips. When I do force myself to travel, I'm a nervous wreck. I inspect every inch of my room and barricade the door. I avoid staff and other guests. Every stranger seems sinister. Logically, I know what happened was a freak occurrence. But emotionally, I'm still scared. I used to be an adventurous, confident globetrotter for work, and now I'm a paranoid recluse. I'm working with a therapist to overcome the lingering trauma. She assures me that in time, new positive experiences in hotels will help rebuild my trust. For now, I've asked my manager to keep me assigned only to local sales meetings. The outside world feels too frightening and unpredictable. But someday, with patience and courage, I hope to rediscover the intrepid business traveler inside me. Last summer, I decided to take a road trip down to Florida to visit my grandma, who lives in a small suburb outside Tampa. I hadn't seen her in almost 3 years since my grandpa passed away. Grandma and I tried to stay in touch with phone calls, but it's just not the same as an in-person visit. The drive down was long, nearly 11 hours, just going the speed limit most of the way. I stopped for the night at a roadside motel in southern Georgia to get some rest before continuing the journey in the morning. When I finally arrived at Grandma's little yellow house, she came running out the front door waving excitedly. She pulled me into a big warm hug, patting my back. I felt at home right away. She looked exactly the same as I remembered, short curly gray hair and those colorful floral print tops she always wears. Her house still had the faint smell of cinnamon and brown sugar, and she had made a fresh pan of her famous lasagna for dinner, my favorite. We spent that first evening catching up on everything new since we had last seen each other. Grandma told me stories about her gardening club and the neighbor's new dog that barks constantly. I updated her on my job promotion and my plans to finally move into a bigger apartment. It felt like no time had passed. The next few days we fell into a nice, relaxing routine. Mornings we would walk down to the beach that was only a couple blocks away. The ocean breeze felt so refreshing, and we'd collect interesting seashells along the water. Then we'd stop for lunch at a cafe on the pier overlooking the waves. In the afternoons, when it got too hot, we'd drive over to the indoor mall or browse through Grandma's favorite local thrift shops. She loved showing me all of her unique finds, like vintage jewelry and quirky kitchen gadgets. And we cooked dinner together in the evenings, or classic recipes that always remind me of childhood. At the end of the week, it was unfortunately time for me to start the long drive back home. I needed to get back to work after taking some time off for the trip down to see Grandma. We had a nice big pancake breakfast together before I loaded up my car. Grandma packed me some snacks for the road, like sandwiches and cookies. She came outside to wave goodbye as I pulled out of the driveway, shouting, "Drive safe." I set my GPS for the route home, planning to drive about 8 hours to make it halfway, then stop overnight and finish the trip the next day. The first stretch of the drive was smooth sailing. I munched on the snacks Grandma had packed and listened to my favorite driving music playlist. Around hour 5, cruising along a rural highway in northern Florida, I noticed a beat-up car creeping up on the left side and pulling up next to me. I instinctively felt uneasy about it, but figured the driver was just being reckless. But instead of passing me, the car stayed right there matching my speed, keeping pace with my car. Due to the dark illegal tint on the windows, I couldn't make out how many people were inside or anything else about them. The hairs on my neck stood up as my sense of unease grew. This clearly wasn't normal behavior. Suddenly, the car jolted forward and cut sharply in front of me, forcing me to slam on the brakes to avoid a collision. Before I could react, the back door swung open and a menacing stranger leaped out, running toward my car waving his arms for me to stop. Adrenaline surged through my veins. I threw the gear shift into reverse and stomped the gas pedal, launching backward away from the man. He chased me for a few steps, shouting inaudibly with a wild look in his eyes. I whipped the wheel around, fishtailing onto the grass median, and put it back into drive. Glancing back, I saw the car making a wide U-turn to come after me again. My heart pounded furiously at the nightmarish scene unfolding. I floored the accelerator to get back on the highway, the car's engine roaring in protest as the speedometer needle climbed over 90 miles per hour. The car caught up shockingly fast, shadowing me from behind. I weaved recklessly between other cars but couldn't lose them. Each time I checked my mirror, they were right there. So, in a desperate move, I veered off at the very next exit, not even registering where it led. The screeching turn destabilized them briefly, and I was able to gain some distance off the highway. The road now wound through rows of citrus groves dotted with fruit stands. I blew through the first intersection, failing to brake fully in my panic. To my dismay, the relentless car followed suit, ignoring the stop sign, and continuing their pursuit. Up ahead, I spotted a large produce stand with a farm truck pulling out onto the road. I slowed just enough that the truck cut me off from the car, blocking their path. Seizing the opportunity, I whipped down the first unpaved side road I saw, churning a cloud of dust behind me. I watched vigilantly for any sign of the car, re-peering over the next minute. When the road stayed empty, I finally steered off into the cover of the citrus trees to catch my breath and gather my rattled nerves. Once the tremors in my hands subsided, I cautiously got back on the road, constantly checking for threats. The rest of the drive was peaceful, but my paranoia remained elevated. I stuck dutifully to the speed limit and powered through until I crossed the Georgia state line, where I decided to stop for the night. At the motel, I triple-checked that my door was locked before collapsing into bed from mental exhaustion. My mind replayed the harrowing encounter on loop, speculating about what sinister fate I may have met if I hadn't reacted quickly enough. The next day, I cranked the music up loud during the final leg home, constantly scanning for the car of my nightmares. Each vehicle that drove past put me on edge, even though rationally I knew the random drivers were almost certainly not a threat. When I finally pulled safely into my own garage, I let out an immense sigh of relief. I called Grandma right away to recount the story so she wouldn't worry that something bad had happened. She expressed sincere gratitude that I was unharmed and said not to let the experience detract from the lovely visit we'd shared. And Grandma was right, as she often is. I shouldn't judge an entire trip based on one brief, terrifying incident, but I don't think I'll be eager to drive the long haul down to Florida again anytime soon. I was buzzing with excitement as my friends Jess, Mike, and I arrived at the Marrakech airport for our long-awaited trip to Morocco. We had been planning this vacation for what felt like forever, scripting and saving our money, researching things to do, and daydreaming about riding camels through the desert. After a smooth flight, we stepped off the plane tired but eager to start our adventure. The blast of hot air that hit us as soon as we exited was a stark contrast to the cold winter weather back home. We hiring a taxi to drive us to our hotel, watching the colorful blur of the market zoom by as we made our way through the busy streets. Our destination was a budget hotel I had found online called the Sahara Inn. It didn't look as nice in person as the photos on the website, which clearly had been taken years ago. The building was run down with cracks in the plaster walls and peeling teal paint. But we didn't mind. We were young travelers on a tight budget. The receptionist handed us a key attached to a large brass disc. We hauled our backpacks up 2 flights of stairs to room 254, which would be our home for the next week. It was musty inside, the kind of smell that you never can air out no matter how much you open the window. 2 small beds were crammed against one wall, and a lumpy cot had been placed along the other. Cozy, Mike said, trying to keep the mood upbeat. We dropped our bags and, after a quick debate, decided to let Jess have one of the real beds. This place may be a dump, but I'm just excited we're finally here together, I said. We were determined to make the most of it. After changing out our plain clothes, we headed into the Medina, ready to explore the city. Jess marched eagerly in front, always the leader, with Mike and I trailing behind, taking pictures of everything. The narrow streets were crowded with vendors peddling fragrant spices, handmade rugs, carved woodworks, and glittering jewelry. Locals whizzed by on motorbikes while we dodged donkey carts, hauling bushels of oranges. The sights, sounds, and smells were so new and exotic. We spent hours wandering around, chatting with the friendly shopkeepers and haggling for the best deals on souvenirs. Eventually, we found a small restaurant serving traditional Moroccan dishes and decided to stop for dinner. Sitting atop the carpeted benches, we gorged ourselves on tagines, couscous, and sweet mint tea, savoring the incredible flavors. We stayed out late into the evening until the jet lag finally hit us. Exhausted from our first day in Morocco, we trudged back to the hotel ready for bed. Jess was out like a light the minute her head hit the pillow. As I drifted off, I smiled, thinking about the amazing adventures the next few days had in store for us. Sometime in the pitch black of early morning, I was startled awake by a horrible howling noise outside. It sounded like a wounded animal crying out in anguish and pain, its wails piercing the stillness of the night. Jess and Mike woke up too, both of their faces etched with fear and confusion in the dim moonlight leaking in from our window. "What is that?" Jess whispered sharply. "I don't know, some kind of animal," Mike offered, but he seemed uncertain. The unearthly moans continued, sometimes rising into shrieking crescendos that made my skin crawl. We huddled close on Jess's bed, listening to the chilling cries echo through the empty streets surrounding our hotel. They seemed to get louder and closer as the night dragged on, keeping us frozen in terror. Finally, after what felt like hours, an eerie silence settled back over the city. None of us could fall back asleep after that terrifying nighttime disturbance. Maybe it was just the wind, I said weakly, trying to rationalize the experience. But deep down, I knew it was something more sinister than the elements. In the morning, we asked the front desk clerk about what we had heard. "Ah, yes, that was a djinn," he said casually, as if this was a normal nightly occurrence. "A what?" I asked. The clerk explained that djinns were supernatural spirits made from fire. They're like humans and they live among us, similar to ghosts or demons. The locals believe they roam the city streets after dark, haunting people with their otherworldly cries. We were shocked and a little freaked out to think we had potentially heard an actual djinn right outside our hotel room. The three of us had never really believed in ghosts before this trip. But after listening to those bone-chilling wails carry on the wind, we started to wonder if there was some truth to the legends. Despite our supernatural encounter that first night, the rest of our time in Morocco was incredible. We rode camels out to a desert camp, explored the winding alleys of Fez, and spent long, lazy days laying on the beach in Essaouira. But that harrowing experience stuck with us, a reminder of the local lore and mystical culture we got just a taste of. Looking back now, that trip was unforgettable, full of colorful sights, lively markets, delicious food, and an intriguing brush with the paranormal. The eerie cries of that djinn in the darkness will haunt me forever, and always bring me back to the magic of Morocco. I could barely contain my excitement as I boarded the plane for my long-awaited trip to China. I had been dreaming of visiting the Great Wall since I was a child, and now it was finally happening. This 2-week solo adventure was a huge milestone for me. I settled into the faded cloth seat near the window and gazed outside of the tarmac, imagining the sights I would explore in China. As the rest of the passengers filed on, I paid little attention until a figure plopped down in the seat next to mine. I glanced over to see a person enveloped in bulky clothing from head to toe. Their face was completely obscured by a hood pulled low over their eyes. Strange choice for a summer flight, I thought, but I was too distracted with my travel plans to give it much thought. We taxied down the runway and were soon soaring high above the clouds. The mysterious shrouded passenger next to me remained silent and motionless throughout takeoff, not even glancing out the window next to them. An odd flying companion, but I shrugged it off and put on my headphones, ready to be lulled to sleep by the hum of the engines. A few hours into the endless flight, I got up to use the restroom. I shuffled my way down the narrow aisle, legs stiff from sitting for so long. After relieving myself, I slowly made my way back to my seat, daydreaming about the frenetic energy of Shanghai I would experience in just a few short hours. As I approached my row, I froze in my tracks. My seat was empty. The concealed person who had been sitting there the entire flight had vanished. I whipped my head around, certain they must be standing in the aisle or stretching near the bathrooms. But there was no sign of them. This made no sense. We were over the middle of the Pacific Ocean. There was nowhere they could have gone. My mind raced, heart pounding. Had I imagined the whole thing? No. I distinctly remembered the figure slumped in baggy clothes next to me at takeoff. I even recalled the fabric pattern of their sleeve brushing against me. There was definitely someone there. Flustered, I flagged down a passing flight attendant. She greeted me with a peppy smile that quickly faded to confusion as I described the phantom passenger. "There hasn't been anyone sitting there all flight," she insisted calmly. "The seat was empty when we took off." I stammered that there absolutely had been someone there just a short time ago. I knew I hadn't hallucinated them. But the flight attendant maintained her polite skepticism. Shaken, I retreated back to my seat, now empty beside me. I spent the rest of the flight anxiously peering around for any sign of the vanished stranger, but it was like they never existed. The mysterious encounter consumed my thoughts even after landing in Shanghai. I found myself telling everyone I interacted with, fellow tourists, waiters, taxi drivers. Most just gave me puzzled looks, but a few nodded knowingly. "You must have met one of the jinn," they said. These supernatural beings were known to lurk on planes and ships, appearing human one moment and then disappearing without a trace. I listened eagerly as locals described their county's folklore. The jinn were said to be shapeshifters and tricksters. Over centuries, stories circulated of them materializing on modes of transport only to vanish before reaching their destination. Legend held that the jinn sought to unsettle travelers and seduce them into hidden worlds. Part of me wondered if exhaustion from my long journey had caused me to imagine things. But no, I knew what I experienced was real. I could not rationally explain it, and that deeply unsettled me. My entire view of the world felt shaken. Reality was not as solid as I always believed. I found myself questioning every passing stranger as I toured China, staring a bit too long, half expecting them to dematerialize before my eyes. At crowded landmarks, I scrutinized people's faces, watching for any flickering in their features that hinted at something supernatural lurking beneath the surface. Boarding my return flight, I felt a prickle of apprehension. What if the phantom traveler reappeared? Or worse, what if more joined them? I shook off these paranoid thoughts, laughing inwardly at myself. But I still felt a nagging unease that only grew as we soared thousands of feet in the air over the Pacific. Despite my vigilance, nothing paranormal occurred. The flight passed uneventfully, my neighbor this time a portly businessman who snoozed heavily the entire way. As we coasted on the runway back home, I let out a sigh of relief. In some ways, I was grateful to have witnessed something beyond belief, even if it rattled my sense of reality. It reminded me how much wonder and mystery still exists in the world, under the surface of mundane life, but I also now carried an apprehension previously unknown to me. I could no longer travel untroubled, with the knowledge that unexplainable forces can permeate our orderly world when least expected. My time in China left me with amazing memories, but also an indelible unease that would linger long after my journey ended.
Thanks for listening in. If you like these stories and want to hear more, then please subscribe and like and support this new channel. We have more stories for you to listen to.